Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. We're just going to wait a minute or two, let people sort of trickle in, and then we'll get started.
I hear children.
It's nice. I like it.
I know. It feels like we're in a house. I like it. House party.
My book launch had so many babies and they were crying and things like that. And I was like, this is like home.
I love that.
I do think that there's some things I would miss about this, you know, about these events that are really nice. Yeah, having events, you know, having events in this kind of format. There's some really nice aspects to it too.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm reading the chat. Let's see what's going on with it right now.
Zoom won't go away.
Technical difficulties are always part and parcel, though.
I'm gonna make sure my heater is off so it doesn't come on.
A mechanic dog that looks like a dog and acts like a dog.
What's the weather there in Denver?
It is so like overcast and cold today.
Oh, really? Oh, no.
Yeah, and it was like 70 degrees yesterday. So it's just, it goes like that. And then the fires are raging.
Oh, that's terrible.
Oh, wait, you're getting fires too?
Yeah, people are being evacuated like 30 minutes away from downtown. So
Oh my God.
yeah, it's crazy.
That's horrible. Okay, what's happening here?
This year.
It's been special, huh?
Oh,
Yeah.
good God. It's not even winter yet. What is happening? Is Colorado, was it that one weird weather situation where one day it was like 70 and the next day was 29?
Yeah, we had like a record-breaking day, and then we had fires, ice, and like flood or something. Yeah.
Okay, so are we ready to start?
Yeah, let's get started. So I'm just going to quickly introduce the readers tonight. I want to welcome everybody to our event tonight during a debate
We're
night.
not started yet. Hold on.
What?
Are we live? I don't think we're live.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're live and recording. I just want to thank everyone for coming. A second event for Pittsburgh Contemporary Writers Series. We're sort of learning as we go here. Our next event, I just wanted to let you know, is going to be on February 4th, and that's going to be a conversation with music journalists Will Hermes and New Yorker music writer Amanda Petrusich. It's going to be moderated by Peter Trachtenberg, so it's going to be a really fun night about music journalism, and that's what we're doing next on February 4th. I want to let you know that in the chat, you're going to find a link to our campus bookstore that's selling copies of Kali's book. And Sabrina and Corina, her short story collection. So please do use that link. And finally, before I introduce the speakers tonight, I want to mention that there's going to be time for questions. So do put in your question in the Q&A. And Angie, once she has a conversation with Kali, will ask the questions afterwards. very quickly, I want to first introduce our wonderful moderator, which maybe a lot of you already know, my colleague here at Pitt in the writing program. Angie Cruz is the author of 3 novels, the most recent being the wonderful Dominicana, shortlisted for the Women's Prize, a Good Morning America book club pick, and a lot of other wonderful accolades. She's co-editor-in-chief of Asterix Journal, amazing magazine that has a new issue out just today, right? A whole issue on Elena Ferrante, which I can't wait to dig into. And she's going to be moderating this conversation tonight. And now I want to introduce our featured speaker tonight, the Fred R. Brown winner this year, Kali Fajardo-Anstine. She's the author of Sabrina and Corina, a book that was a finalist for the National Book Award in 2019, the Penn Bingham Prize, the Story Prize, the Soroyan International Prize, and winner of the American Book Award and Reading the West Award. Fajardo-Anstine is the 2019 recipient of the Denver Mayor's Award for Global Impact in the Arts. Her writing has appeared in the Oprah magazine, the American Scholar, Boston Review, Bellevue Literary Review, the Idaho Review, Southwestern American Literature, and elsewhere. Kali has been awarded fellowships from Yaddo, McDowell, Tin House, and Hedgebrook, which a place I love, even though I couldn't figure out how to light a fire there, which is something you are supposed to do. Never did figure this out. She holds an MFA from the University of Wyoming and is from Denver, Colorado, where she is beaming to us from right now, downtown Denver. And her work has been translated into multiple languages. So I'm really excited to have Angie moderate this discussion with Kali. Kali, welcome to the University of Pittsburgh.
Thank you so much for having me, Irina. Thank you for that introduction. I wish I could see you both in person because I got to meet you both. I think, well, Irina once on my touring and Angie twice, and I miss you guys in person. So thank you for having me on
Likewise.
Zoom.
Likewise.
All right. So tonight I am going to read from this book I wrote called Sabrina and Corina. And I'm going to read from 2 stories. I thought it would be nice to read from the titular story, Sabrina and Corina. And I'm also going to give a reading from Sugar Babies. A lot of readers really like Sugar Babies, so I kind of feel like I have to read from it usually. But I, as the writer, also like Sugar Babies. So for this section that I'm going to read from in Sabrina and Corina, what you need to know is that Sabrina is a makeup artist at Macy's at the Cherry Creek Mall in Denver, and her cousin Corina, at the start of the story, she discovers has been strangled to death by a man. Sabrina has been asked by the family if she will apply the makeup on Sabrina's body for the funeral. So the section I'm going to read starts in a flashback when Corina was still alive. We were inseparable in high school. Sabrina was my best friend, my closest cousin. My father would give me a hard time, ask if I ever tired of carrying her dead weight. But Sabrina was fun. She was vivid and felt everything deeply. From the drunken nights that we stayed up until 4 a.m. mapping out our tiny lives with enormity only Sabrina could imagine. To her, everything was possible. Money, true love, a way out of Colorado. Even after she dropped out in 11th grade to work at a sports bar downtown, I used to do homework at a back booth, marveling at the way she glided between the tables, sleek and fluid, with her long black hair curled around her elegant neck. Men would follow her between bites of their onion rings and beer-battered fish, insatiable, as if my cousin were just another symptom of their hunger. After graduation, my father offered to pay for cosmetology school. He said that I needed to do something else besides run around like other Cordova women. He mostly meant Sabrina, of course, who by that point had started showing up to family dinners, smelling like a bar room floor. But it wasn't just her. There was the distant niece taken away by the state, the cousins who died messing around with heroin, great Auntie Dodie left blind after a date with the wrong man, and Auntie Liz found dead in her Chrysler the motor running, the garage door locked. My grandmother hardly mentioned Auntie Liz except to say what had killed her had killed them all. While I was studying cuts and colors, perms and relaxers, Sabrina continued working in bars and sleeping with men who all looked alike. Tall, thick-necked, green eyes or blue. In my mind, these men formed a lineup of indifferent masculine faces. The same withdrawn expression I had seen in those old photographs of Sabrina's father. Sometimes she would visit me at the beauty college. She'd stand at my station in wrinkled clothes, looking like she'd just woken up at noon. While the other girls snickered and popped their gum, Sabrina would scoop away her hair, and I would see the bruises, hickeys like rotten goose eggs all down her throat. "They'll send me home from work," she'd say, and I always helped her conceal everything. After finishing beauty school, I rented a studio apartment on the west side that overlooked an abandoned public pool. At night, on my second floor balcony, I'd sit and wonder about the missing diving board, replaced with an orange traffic cone, as if that could stop someone from leaping headlong into hard cement. It was a lonely place, and Sabrina only visited during the rare times when she was single. She'd come over and shadow me throughout the apartment, like a child who was afraid she'd stop existing if someone wasn't there to see her. "You ever do makeovers on women who look hideous without makeup?" she asked. She was sitting on the lid of my toilet, 2 Coronas between her thighs, one for each of us. We had the radio on an oldies station, the type of music our moms played when we were little girls, and they would drive us through the mountains in the summertime. "Sure," I said, smiling. "But after I fix them up, no one can tell." "I guess only they can." Sabrina checked her reflection in the mirror, smudging her berry lip liner with her left pinky. "And of course, you." We went to a bar on the edge of the city that night. Near a highway overpass, neon signs hung in the foggy windows. We played a couple games of pool and drank shots of cheap tequila, and every now and then, Sabrina would dance over to the old school jukebox and flip through the records, the light flickering over her face, her reflection a floating bust on the glass. I sat at the bar and I watched a group of men circle around her. They held their beers close to their chests, and they waited for an opportunity to move in like vultures. "We're going outside for a cigarette," Sabrina said. And those 2 pale-faced guys with broad shoulders and thick necks stood behind her, nervously casting gazes my way, as if afraid I'd ruin their fun. "But you don't smoke," I said. "I picked it up," Sabrina said, "just now." I watched the front window as she stepped outside and flopped against a parked minivan, twisting her hair around her fingers, her smile all teeth. The men stood next to her, packing their smokes. Neither was in her league, but Sabrina had a way of talking to men like she was a gift, an expression of a girlish face and a girlish giggle. It didn't matter who it was, so long as they gave her attention back. After a while, I couldn't watch her anymore. I swiveled around on my stool and I tried to catch the bartender's attention. He eventually came by, a white washcloth over his shoulder. "That your sister?" he asked, glancing out the window. "Not my sister," I said, and I looked at Sabrina, still tossing her hair back, the cords of her neck forming a chute to her collarbones. "She's my cousin," I said. "I knew you two were related." He poured tequila and set it before me. "You look similar." "Not really," I said, and swallowed my shot. When Sabrina hobbled back inside, she could hardly stand in wedge platforms. The men guided her by her wrist, and she swayed between them until they released their grips, and Sabrina leaned over me. Her perfume had gone rancid with hints of rotten fruit, something that belongs in the trash. Corina, she asked, "having fun?" I glared at the 2 guys beside her. They were far less drunk than my cousin and beaming with pride as if they had already gotten her into a cab headed for one of their apartments. "Let's get going," I said. Sabrina squinted at me. Tiny wrinkles had begun to form around her eyes and lips. "You can leave me here," she said. "I'll get home okay." With my hands firmly around her wrist, I towed her to the front door. The two men laughed, backed off, and began to circle another girl a few stools down. The bartender pulled the white washcloth over the bar, eyeing the two of us while we left with what I thought was pity. "Let's go." I was gripping Sabrina's wrist harder than necessary. She wobbled behind me and I squeezed tighter, angrier, worried my nails would mark her skin. "Don't you care how people look at you?" Outside, the air was cool, the moon surrounded by a thin cloud. I kept dragging Sabrina to the car as she tottered behind me, her face to the sky like that of a dreamy child. And when I finally let her go, she steadied herself against my trunk, opening her blue eyes wide. "They look at us the same way, Corina." She laughed and pointed at my face. "They look at us like we're nothing." I told her to get into the car and I said she was drunk. As we drove home, I glanced at her worn out face resting against the window and I felt something unknowable about Sabrina, some sadness at her core that moved between us like a sickness. Where did it come from? Or had it always been there, growing inside her, filling her lungs with its liquid weight? "Sabrina," I whispered, tapping her shoulder, but she was already asleep. And for the first time in my life, I missed someone sitting right beside me. Sabrina's body lay on a chrome table, surrounded by clear tubes and murky chemicals. Her head was propped up on a plastic stand, her eyes were closed, and her whitish mouth curdled along the edges. The room smelled of singed skin, disinfectant, and vinegar. "These pretty girls," Carlos, the funeral director, said, "they get themselves into such ugly situations." I stared at Sabrina's body, her dark hair framing the pale column of her rippled throat. The bruising spanned her entire neck. Bluish lines edged sour yellow and circled her indented vocal cords. Broken blood vessels spread to her collarbones, and her bloated chin was tilted stiffly to the right, perched oddly above it all. "You think you'll be okay?" Carlos asked. I exhaled and I hid my hands behind my back, my fingers lightly shaking. "I'll be fine. Where's the makeup?" Carlos wheeled over a metal table. On it were several glass jars and brushes laid out in rows and a small cassette player radio. "This makeup is different," he said. "It doesn't blend as well as your traditional products, but application is mostly the same. You know about the eyes and lips, right?" "What about them?" I asked. Carlos ran his hand above Sabrina's eyes. "We suture them shut to set them in an attractive pose. I used the picture you gave me. She should look like herself." He handed me the photo from his pocket. Sabrina had taken it in my bathroom mirror. She was maybe 21, 22 at the time. He rubbed a freckle on Sabrina's forehead like he was polishing a piece of furniture. He turned on that radio, the Shirelles, a tune about a man doing all of us, every woman who had ever lived, wrong. Carlos told me to find him down the hallway when I was done. I walked around Sabrina's body. I reached out, touching her cheek, warmer than expected, and I got to work, focusing on disguising the swelling of her temples and chin. Her right cheek had grown stiff with the ridge cutting near her lips. I filled it in with my thinnest brush and I stepped back. Her lashes, I noticed, had grown longer in death. It almost made her look shy. With a boar bristle brush, I detangled her knotted strands, and her hair shone like spilled motor oil, greens and golds and blues, all in that black. Corkscrewed sections bounced off my curling iron, more alive than anything else on that table. For her neck, I grabbed a lime green concealer with olive undertones, a normal base coat for problematic rosacea. I dabbed a fanning synthetic fiber brush into the jar and it swirled over my wrist. A good undercoat, even and heavy. Her throat felt plastic and ribbed where notches of hardened flesh had risen and stayed. They did not give way as I worked the brush from her collarbones to her soft chin. I covered her skin in a solid flesh tone, A small pool of makeup congealed in the cup of her sternum. I used a tissue to wipe it away. I considered checking the backside of her neck for bruising, but I realized that no one, not even my grandmother, would see. Sabrina was forever to face ceilings and casket tops padded in pink satin, and once she was lowered into her grave, her throat would collapse, slowly disintegrating into the dark. Okay, I'll stop reading from that story there. Okay. I promise some of my stories are a little funny. So I'm gonna read now from Sugar Babies, just a little bit, the opening section of it. And yeah, if you have any questions that are coming up as I'm reading, please feel free to put them in the chat so we can access them in a little bit. Sugar Babies is a story that's pretty near and dear to my heart because it's the only story of mine that I did not have to heavily revise. It sort of came to me as a divine gift, and I wrote it all in a sitting, and I didn't have to change the ending or anything. And so I always want to pay homage to my little Sugar Babies because it helps me a lot as a writer. Sugar Babies. Though the southern Colorado soil was normally hard and cakey, it had snowed and then rained an unusual amount that spring. Some of the boys in my 8th grade class decided it was the perfect ground for playing Army. They borrowed shovels and picks from their father's sheds, placing the tools on their bicycle handlebars and riding out to the western edge of our town, Sewarita, a place where the land with its silken fibers of swaying grass resembled a sleeping woman with her face pressed firmly to the pillow, a golden blonde by day, a raven-haired beauty by night. The first boy to hit bone was Robbie Martinez. He did so with the blunt edge of a rusted shovel. Out of the recently drenched earth, he lifted a piece of the brittle, faded whiteness and tossed it downwind as if it were nothing more than a scrap of paper. Look, he said, kneeling as if he was praying. Everybody, come look. The other boys gathered around. There in the ground lay broken pieces of bowls with black zigzagging designs. Next to those broken bowls were human teeth, scattered like dried kernels of yellow corn. Above them, the sun had begun to fade behind the tallest peak of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The sky was pale and bleak, like the bloated belly of a lizard passing them above. Don't touch it, Robbie said. None of it. We need to tell somebody. And tell they did. The entire town, everyone it seemed, was a witness. Okay, I will stop there. Thank you all for listening to my reading from Sabrina Corina.
Clapping. Clapping for everybody before I turn myself off. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. It was so great to hear you read it.
Thank you, Irina.
Okay, so wow. I haven't actually heard you read, which is crazy because I feel like I've heard you speak, but I haven't heard you read. And it's just, your work is so beautiful. So beautiful. I'm so glad you exist.
I'm so glad you exist, and I'm so glad your work exists. Thank you, Angie.
So, I have so many questions. Basically, everyone here, I think, is a writer. So we might as well just talk about writing for the next 30 minutes. And a lot of the questions I think are coming up are writing questions. But one of the things I was thinking about is it wasn't even a question I prepared. I prepared a lot of questions. I'm very prepared. I spent the entire day with you, actually, looking at all your, but I thought about you saying, this is the first story I didn't have to change the ending, right? So what I would like to talk about is revision, right? Like, how do you revise your work?
Yeah. So I think sometimes I've been asked, what is your biggest challenge as a writer? And it really was developing the skill of revision. And then once I figured out that you can do things over and over and make them better and better, it really gave me a lot of freedom as a writer. So I was the type of writer when I was younger who would just, bust out a draft in a few days or whatever and turn it into workshop and want to be admired. And sometimes they would, and sometimes they wouldn't. But I did not know that I could go back and fix it until a mentor of mine, Radwit Lapsharoensap, he said, this is a great story. It was my story, Any Further West, from the collection. And he said, now you need to go rewrite it. And I thought, that is absurd. Like, I have to go out and party and like do whatever I do that's not related to writing. I was like, I just can't sit here and rewrite stories. But I started reading a lot of craft books around that time, and I started doing a lot of diagramming, and I began to realize that this is all designed. You know, everything is a choice, every comma, every word, every sentence, and the layout of every paragraph. And so now when I write, I really force myself to do like a full down draft. And that usually can take anywhere from a couple weeks to a few days, depending on the length of the story. And then I go back and I systematically start over from the beginning, and I try to see, is this the structure I even want? Is this even the angle I want to tell with the story? And then I usually just start all over again and I rewrite. And that's actually the way I've approached revision with my novel, much to my editor's frustration, because I want to rewrite the whole thing every time. And I also, like, I'm somebody who's very obsessive with my work, and I have a lot of mental and creative energy. And so revision is a good way to focus it and not, spiral out into these other issues that affect us as writers, like rejection and just our lives. Our lives are very, they're very uncontrollable. So revision is something that I can completely control 100% by myself. And there's times where I have to step away because I made a joke on Twitter that I was like picking at my face when I was picking at my novel, but there's no mom to tell you to stop. It's just you in the middle of the night going like that over and over.
Yeah, no, I love what you said about it's really designed, right? Like once you figure out, like first, you can't really, you either have a story or you don't have a story. And then once you put the story down on paper, when you learn the mechanics of story, which I find very exciting. I wasn't taught that in an MFA program. I kind of was floated along. I don't know what your experience was, but I was floated along being told, wow, your stories are so colorful and cool. Keep doing what you do. But like no one was giving me any kind of mentorship. So I really had to learn through reading.
Yeah.
And looking for craft books and trying to unlock whatever. But then I realized, oh my God, so much of it is design and fun, actually. I find it very fun.
It's joyful. No, I had a similar experience, Angie. Like I dropped out of my first MFA program. I was not getting the kind of mentorship that I got in my second MFA program. And my mentor had studied under Charles Baxter, and he was bringing a lot of theory and craft to the classroom that I just had not been exposed to. So one of my great passions as a writer now is just letting people know that like there are ways to access this information. This isn't that mysterious what we do. And revision can make it so much better.
What are one of the craft books that for you were really useful?
Yeah, so I just bought all of them, like all of the Grey Wolf Art of series, or maybe all close to all of them, so I could have them around. But I remember the Narrative Time one from that whole series. So it's called Grey Wolf Art of. Edwidge Danticat has one on death.
Art of Death, yeah.
Yeah, that one's amazing. There's one on perspective. So that's like a great set to just have. James Wood, the art of fiction, I think it's called. That one is really helpful. I teach from that a lot. What I find most helpful about that book is the idea of free and direct style. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know that I was naturally doing it sometimes. And also Madison Smart Bell's narrative design. And these books are old. Like I'm talking about books that are like published 20 years ago, but there's also Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott and Stephen King's On Writing. And these are all very helpful. But there's also this great website that has all of these interviews from writers of color on craft. So if you like Google writers of color on craft, there's this huge database that comes up, because we're not given many publishing contracts as is, but we're definitely not giving many publishing contracts just to talk about our craft. So that website is also very helpful.
Well, after listening to your talk yesterday on place, I'm like, you should write The Art of Place. Like literally, like I have never heard anyone talk about place. Also, making central oral storytelling, right? When you said my mother is a professional storyteller, and really, I think we forget, like in these short story classes, that stories, when you want to repeat them, is when they really have power, right? Think of all the stories you started with. I'm like, yes, it's a story I heard over and over again. So I'm curious about the professional storyteller.
Yeah.
Being raised by a professional storyteller. How like and thinking of origin stories and how your world was shaped through these stories. And you said something about how they didn't always often go with the stories you were being told by the mainstream or at your school. And that, so what are some stories that you were told that for you were essential in you understanding, yeah, your work, your original design or code for living? Like, is there anyone that sticks, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many of them. And this is why I find Dominicana so interesting, because you're doing like what I like to do. You're taking like a story that you knew from a family member. Yeah, so the beginnings of my world were storytelling, and I took it for granted. Like, I didn't realize, like, this is a very special thing that, like, every other day we're over at an elder's house and we're sitting around and they're watching Turner Classic Movies, and they're just like repeating things that happened to our family to people that died 100 years ago or more, and even people who died up into the 80s, and just like being seeped in those. And so I didn't realize that I was being trained as a fiction writer even before I realized, like, I could probably go out and maybe try to have a career as this. But the stories that were told in the home, they had a couple of purposes now that I'm looking back. One was warning. That was the biggest reason as women, we were told the stories. And there were warnings, and frankly, like, people have brought this up about my work and it's been a criticism, but a lot of the warnings were for white men, like, be careful. There's been a lot of incidences in our family where white men have done things to our women. And so that was something you get raised with. We come from a long line of poverty. So there's a lot of storytelling about, try to get out of poverty if you can, try to find a man, So a lot of these, like, instructions for living. I remember my auntie trying to teach me how to get blood out of sheets and things like that. Like, these very specific female storytelling traditions that I just thought were part of, what it meant to be a person. I didn't realize that we were lucky, and that not everyone's having that kind of storytelling. But to go back to my mom as a professional storyteller, my mom is a fascinating figure in my life. We're really sort of similar, but we're very different. By my age, she had 7 children, 2 sets of twins. She has a law degree, but she did not practice. Lots of marriages. She's like an interesting person.
Mm-hmm.
But she's a collector of tales. So she was self-publishing her own books that focused on food traditions and pathways. And she was collecting them from different cultures in Colorado. And she would go out and she would perform. And I never realized, I am a version of my mom, but now I'm a professional writer. And so I think of my craft as an extension of my mom's craft, and an extension of my great-grandparents, and even further back in the line. And so that's why, I don't know, I feel like such a deep connection to storytelling, because I don't feel like it's a singular act. Like, this is something that's coming from an ancestral, familial realm.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I love is that in the craft, and I guess this is where it's exciting to see so many different voices coming, like, I think when I went to school, feels like forever ago, but like, I was really pretty much taught only white men, in particular in short stories.
Yeah.
And the stories were pretty much the same. There was this individual that had some kind of big obstacle or desire, and they, but like, when I look at your stories and you're talking about the community and all the things that you try to bring into it, like a story like Remedies, for example, right? Where, and I know that Matt Johnson is a huge fan of yours, and he's a friend of mine. And, and he wrote something about how you obliterated the one voice in the story. And like, it's hard to like pay attention, like figure out whose story this is. And it works, right? And it is an American story. It's our American story. It's the, I feel very US Latino to me. Like, if I could pick one thing that felt very familiar to me, is that there is no center, right? It's almost like we are all together collectively a center. And to do that in short stories, it's very hard. So I'm wondering, because I was encouraged to streamline and to simplify.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm curious, where did you meet resistance in trying to navigate this new space that honors your reality? which is very different.
Oh my God, Angie. I faced a lot of resistance. So like you, I was exposed to a lot of white men. And interestingly enough, I like became a fan a lot of these white male authors. Like I love Richard Yates. Revolutionary Road is one of my favorite novels, his short stories, John Cheever. I love all this stuff, but they were getting to do things that I was not getting to do. They were getting to talk about rumpus rooms and these suburbs in Connecticut and just taking it for granted as if we as an American reading public would know about these spaces. I don't know about those spaces. I grew up here in Colorado. So in a way, I was borrowing from the white men because I was like, look what they get to do. They just get to talk and we just get to accept and they don't have to explain anything. And so I was trying to subversively take that and put that into my own work. Remedies was the first time that I found my voice. I had been writing for a while at that time, but it kind of cracked everything open for me. Because I started to realize, like, look, I can write in this style that I enjoy, that I think is musical and pretty, but I can also talk about people like my great grandmother, who maybe are not existing in the same medical realm or spiritual realm as these other grandmothers I've seen in white literature and Anglo literature. So Remedies, it's a really important story for me, but it's also the first time that I took real life elements and I kind of broke them and I put them into a plot. And so in the beginning, like many writers, I started out writing nonfiction. And then Remedies was the first time I was like, no, I want to make this story a little bit different. I want to change some things around. Clarissa gets to be an only child. I'm sick of being a child of 7. She gets to be the only one, and she gets to get a lot of attention from her mom and her great grandma. But I do remember in my first MFA program, the one I dropped out of, when we workshopped that story, did not go well. There were comments like, what mother would ever go see her baby daddy's other baby? And I was like, but yo, that happened. She was like, there was somebody else who said, well, there's a big elephant in the room. Why is this a great grandmother and not just a grandmother? And I was like, I don't know what to tell these people. Like, this is the culture I'm in. I know my great grandparents. I know my half brother, all these things. So, and then there also were questioning about, like, let's focus on food. Like, I'm a monolingual English speaker. My family does not have their any of their indigenous languages. They do not have Spanish anymore. Some of my siblings have like relearned Spanish, but that also was very confusing for people. So I think it just took sticking to what my vision was. I didn't know if it would pay off, and then the book came out, and I guess it was okay. But it was hard. It was hard for many years.
Well, I'm so glad, because I feel like really we have to make the road by walking, and it's a hard walk, right? Like, I know that it was and I want to say this because I mentor a lot of MFA students who come from working class backgrounds or don't have the cultural capital to sort of like move into a literary realm, which is pretty elite, right? Like, there's a lot of privilege in it, and a lot. So when you're kind of going in it blind, like, the struggle is real. And if I think it would help if everyone knew how long it took from your book, from the beginning to publication.
So I think this is something that I don't know if people are willing, people don't go and look these things up, but Remedies was published in 2010. And I did not have a book come out until 2019. Remedies was not the first story I ever wrote either that I was trying to get published. So a decade. I graduated from my MFA program in 2013, and I got the book deal in 2017. And those years, toward the end of those years, were very depressing for me. I did not know if I should keep going. I thought, well, I am running out of money. I'm going to be into my 30s, and I don't know how I'm going to make a living. And then, things started to change a little bit. But I think about how many writers we lose on the path who don't have a family like mine that said, okay, you can come live in the house at 30 years old and we won't charge you rent. That's not everyone has that. So we're losing out on talent by not nurturing writers who come from these backgrounds.
Right. Not having the resources or the support is totally true. I have all these questions from the audience, so I'm going to have to, let me see. I had someone, Elizabeth says, I had a cousin, Sabrina, in my own life. That story hits home. Why do you have so many absent fathers in your stories? What does your dad think of all the absentee dads in your writing?
Well, because there's only 24 of us, I'll just tell you guys. Um, my father, who I like post about on my Instagram and things, he's not my biological father. He's my legal father, but I don't have a relationship with my biological father. So I don't know what he thinks. I guess his wife is pretty upset with the book. She left me a 1 star on Goodreads. But I think that is something I don't really talk about a lot in interviews, but I had a very sort of traumatic abandonment, and it's probably apparent in my work. Yeah, but thank you for that question. But no, I normally don't talk about that.
Well, another one, and I think this is a craft question too. It's a lot of your stories are concerned with violence toward women. Is this something you realized once you pulled the collection together, or was it a theme you had in mind front and center when pulling together the book? And I guess the big question I see when people are jumpstarting books is like, do you need to know what you're doing when you start, basically?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think that we naturally have themes that are embedded in our consciousness and the way that we look at the world. So no, I did not set out to say, oh my gosh, I'm going to write about violence against women over and over and over again until I figure out what I think about violence against women. It was more like, I am very, very bothered by this thing. And I was naturally writing about it. I did not know that a lot of my work dealt with abandonment, or underparented children is a term that I've seen. I did not know that until someone pointed it out to me. As I said yesterday in my place talk, I didn't even know I was writing about place. Like, I just was like, I don't know what's going on here. I'm just like being, I'm just being. So I think as the role of the professional writer is to also take a look at the material that you've laid out, that you've invented, and say, what is it about me that is unique? What am I obsessed with? What am I looking at over and over again? And that's really how you strengthen yourself as a voice. But yeah, I didn't force themes. They came to me, and then I saw what they were later.
Right. And I think that too, like all that training, like you say, I didn't know I was writing about place, but when you look at the training that you had of the way stories were being told to you, I mean, I grew up around the kitchen table with all the women in my family, 3 generations, 4 generations. And like the way they start a story, like you figure out where they are, who's in the scene, what's about to happen, what's the obstacle, what is the place, what does the place look like? Like you're just like, you get all the information right away.
I was with my grandpa last night, and he does this thing with his hands when he tells the story. He'd be like, the cars went that way and that way. I was just like, we need that fiction. We need to be situated.
Right. And the hit, and it's hot, and she was sweating bullets. And like you're suddenly, you get the setting and you get the place, and you find out that the rice was expensive that day. You're like, that was the day we didn't buy rice, so suddenly you have like the blood, the economics, as Grace Paley talks about, right? Okay, there's another question. What piece of advice are most glad you didn't listen to? Conversely, advice you wished you'd listened to earlier? That's a great question.
I guess, I'm such like I'm a stubborn person. So I think when I would get advice that I didn't like, I would just be like, that's stupid advice. But I think I don't know, I guess bad advice, linking the story collection, I think that was bad advice. That was something that was told to me for years and years. Make this into a novel, thread it together. And if I would have followed that advice, I don't think we would have the book that we have today. I think we would have had something that was sort of forced, and it would have felt that way. Advice that I wish I would have listened to better or earlier. I wish I would have had more advice earlier. That's kind of where I was at. I came from a background where I had nothing in terms of advice about agents, the business side of things. And I would go to my advisors and I would say, I want to know about how people are getting book deals. How are they getting agents? And they would tell me, we don't need to talk about business in this MFA program. And so I wish I would have had a little bit more business advice early on. And I think they were trying to protect us because they didn't want us to feel bad in case we never got a book deal or something like that. But I think that kind of mentality keeps people from being able to go and access what they want in life. But yeah, thank you for that question. That's kind of a hard one to answer.
Yeah. Hi, Callie. Thank you for your reading. I read Remedies a few months ago and loved the voice of the narrator. It captures the kind of innocence of her childhood, but it's so detailed and has that sense of wisdom in retrospect. Can you talk about the voice of this narrator? Did it come to you or did you work hard to refine it? And if so, how? How did you refine it? Yeah, I want to know all the tricks because I'm going to use them on my next book. So go ahead.
So I guess Remedies, I don't remember how that one came to me because it was like 10 years ago. But like, for example, I'm working on a story now, and the first voice that I wrote it in was the daughter of a character. And the daughter is telling the story of her mother. And then I showed it to my little sister, who's my first reader. She's like 22 years old. She's been reading for me since she was like 11. She said, no, the real story is the sex scene from the 90s of the mom conceiving the daughter. And so then I switched the whole voice around and I went into the mom. And so those are kinds of things that I like to give as advice, because sometimes I think we feel like the first voice that reveals itself to us is the one we should write in. That's not, sometimes it's just a doorway that's leading to the main pathway that you need to get on. In terms of my child narrators who are detailed but wise, I think that we don't give children as much credit as we should for how smart and intuitive they are. And so I feel like you can write your characters as children a little bit smarter than you think you can, and readers will still accept it. But I don't remember. I honestly, that one was so long ago, and I was such a baby writer that it was just anything I did back then was sort of instinctual and automatic.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you so much for that question.
Yesterday, you called yourself a method writer, which I love. And you said, oh, I went to live on this, doing research for the novel. So you're writing a novel after really being focused on short stories. So I want to ask you about method writing and where has that taken you? And if you have any exciting stories to tell us. I also want to know the difference for you in the movement toward the novel as a short story writer.
Yeah, so I started the novel at 19. So I started it before the stories, and I knew that I did not have the skill level I wanted. And so the stories, I hate to say this because I love the story form and I don't want people to ever think of it as a practice space, but the stories did build up my resilience, because a novel just takes so many years of your life. You really have to stick with that subject matter for a long time. What I've learned in writing a novel compared to a short story is that it's more challenging, and so therefore it's more fulfilling for me. I love a short story. I love trying to like nail one of those, but I wanted to be a novelist. That's what people were publishing that I really admired as a kid. In terms of like stories of like where my method writing has taken me, a lot of weird places. I've lived all over the country, and I used to think it was because I was just like voraciously like hunting for opportunities, but now I'm pretty sure I was hunting for material. One of my most recent things that I did that was like kind of funny is one of my scenes in the novel takes place in this like elegant historic downtown hotel that's like 4 blocks away from me called the Brown Palace. And some of my characters, like my great grandfather, work in these elegant hotels as waiters, but they don't get to stay there. So when the pandemic hit and the prices dropped, I decided I'd go get a room there with my little sister. And like we went ghost hunting in the middle of the night in our white robes. But like there were really sounds upstairs on like the dead floor where nobody was supposed to be, and like slamming doors. So either it was like people squatting or ghosts. So it was just like bad all around. So I do stuff like that. And I try to like go to field research a little bit. And I take like here I have like rocks. Here you go. Like I have rocks from all over in the places that I visit. This is like from a little shop by McDowell. So I'm always sort of collecting things from around me. And I take a lot of photographs. I know people who follow me on Instagram know that, but I take even more than what you see on Instagram. And I use a lot of the photographs for like scene fodder later on.
Cool.
But yeah, lots of hunting.
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, I think that a lot of my travel has been either to see art or experience art or to make art, right? So I feel really lucky that I have like kind of that as a compass.
Yeah.
how do you handle beginnings of stories? This is one of the questions from the audience. Do you refine them first or last, the beginning?
I think the beginnings can be really challenging because that's the doorway where they come in. So if the beginning of your house is disgusting, no one wants to be in there. Like, I'm getting out of this house. The beginning is so important. So you can, I would say, really labor over that first sentence, but think about the way you want your readers to enter. So there's a reason why Sugar Babies opens the way it does. There's a reason why it opens the entire collection, because I'm trying to invite people into this voice. With this new story that I'm working on right now, the beginning completely did not have anything to do with what it is now. It's a totally new vantage point. But I was having a conversation with a friend, and I said something out loud, and that sparked how I thought I should open it. And I got off the phone and I ran over and I started writing down. So I think just be open to inspiration all the time, and always have something ready to capture it when it comes, because your brain is doing work even when you're not sitting at the desk. It's waiting to help you fix things. In terms of endings, I don't know if you asked about it, you only asked about openings, but in terms of endings
Are good.
Yeah. One thing I learned too is that you can try cutting a few lines of your end and look and see, maybe my ending should be closer up to the top than I suspected. And for some reason, this actually works often if you try to cut down 3 or 4 lines at that end.
That was the advice I got from Grace Paley when she was still alive a long time ago. I don't know if you like her as a writer. I mean, but yeah. I would assume you do, because your style is, but she said, yeah, cut the feet. It always is better. She's like less is more.
Feet? That's how she called it?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I love that. I love that.
So we're gonna, I thought the last thing we could say, last question is a question. So both of us, because I feel now it's our responsibility, we both participate in the She Se Puede Zoom, right? And today is the debate. There's a debate. It is gonna happen very soon today. I have to watch it, because my son is it's his homework. So we're going to watch it. Sometimes I find Trump very difficult to watch, but how do you feel? Because I feel like one of the things is really hard for writers in this moment, and particularly writers of color who have any connection to, let's say, the detention, immigration, borders, Black Lives Matter, all of these things are just, and then also not knowing what's going to happen in this election. How do you stay inspired to continue to do the work? Because you seem to be producing, also writing, despite it. So I'm just curious, what are you doing for inspiration?
Well, I think one of the drives for inspiration is that this is all I have. So I think that's one of the major drives. It's this is all I've ever wanted. This is all I've ever had. And nobody in my generations of lineage have ever been given this opportunity. And my mom reminds me of this all the time. She's like, you're the first storyteller in our family who's been listened to on this, this large scale. So I think it's a sense of duty, but also I still live a life that's parallel to a lot of the characters I write about. I have not transcended into a different class in that way yet. And so I'm seeing a lot of things in my daily life that need to be talked about. And that inspires me, because I feel like a lot of people right now don't understand the realities of those of us who, when the shutdown happened, were really in precarious positions in terms of housing, what we're going to do for money, just where we were going to sleep. And so there are times where I'm like, I think there's a reason why I'm still living like this. It's probably to witness this and write about it. This is an important time. So I think there's a sense of storytelling duty. I don't know quite yet what my duty is as an artist and a storyteller in this world, but I think one of them is to reveal truths. And so many people don't have access to truths because they're not willing to look at them, and they don't know people from those kinds of realities. So that's how I say inspired. It's just, I just want to make the world better, and I hope I can do that in my small way.
I certainly believe you have made the world better. You've definitely made my life easier, because I feel less alone in company with your work and your commitment to the working class women who are fighting the fight every day. So thank you for doing that work. I know it's hard. Everyone get this book. If you don't already have it, buy it for Christmas. This is a way you can support Kali as well. And I think that we are done for tonight. Irina, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I just want to thank both of you. It was such a fascinating conversation. It was so great. I didn't write down fast enough some of the books you were talking about, Kali. So if you do have a chance to send me that list, I will put it up on the PGH Writers Series website, because I was just, I had my pen. I was just trying to keep up. It was such a wonderful conversation.
I'll definitely send that, Irina. And thank you, Angie. That was so wonderful to talk to you and to get to see you again, even though it's on this virtual platform. And thank you all the students and everyone who's watching. I appreciate you all so much. And I'm excited to talk to some of you tomorrow.
Well, thank you
Kali.
everybody for coming. It was great having you. Thank you. Come
Thank
see
you,
us
Irina.
next time. Thank you, Angie and Kali.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.